Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be going over 10 helpful tips that helped me whenever I was doing my clinicals as a sonography student. Before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my journey into becoming a sonographer. I started my actual program in 2021 and finished in 2023. I graduated in December and started working in January. The program that I was in, we went to 8 sites total. Yes, it was difficult, but at the end of the day, I ended up learning a lot from my clinical sites. And I hope these tips that I give you will help you do the same. If you like these tips, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends who are also going into any clinicals. It doesn't necessarily have to be sonography, but just clinicals in general. I feel like this is really good information for anybody. These tips aren't in any sort of order. I feel like they're all really important. So without further ado, let's get started. Tip number 1 is come prepared. When I say prepared, I mean overly prepared. And then think about overly prepared and do more than that. Now, on the first day, I would bring minimal things like the necessities. So like your phone, keys, your binder if your school requires you to have one, your lunch, things like that. But then whenever you figure out what space you have at your clinical site where you can place your things, if it's a big space, if it's a small space, then I would start to bring those extra things. So I would bring things like extra comp sheets, Advil, extra pens, a portable charger, some hand lotion. My hands got really dry whenever I was going in and out of patients' rooms. So that was one thing that I carried with me. Basically, just bring anything that you may need in an emergency at your site, including things like an umbrella. I can't count the number of times when I went to my site and the weather changed and I'm trying to walk outside, I don't have an umbrella or a jacket. So I would bring definitely stuff like that in a little backpack, not a big backpack, but just like a medium sized one. And again, you can kind of base that off of the space that they give you at your site. The things that I carried as a student are the same things that I carry to this day as a sonographer. Carry the same backpack, the same things inside the backpack, and it has everything that I may need for the day in it. If you want a video showing what I bring, I'll make one, just let me know. It seems like a small detail, but it'll really help just in case you have some sort of emergency. Tip number 2 is be on time. I would recommend showing up earlier than your scheduled time to be there, just so you can make sure you're in the workroom or near one of your sonographers whenever it's time to clock in and you know where you're supposed to be. This will also allow you time to get settled in mentally and physically. You should always leave your house earlier than you think. This will accommodate for any sort of traffic that may happen along the way. Most people have to get on some form of major highway to get to their site, and you never know what could happen. There could be a wreck at any point and they could shut down all the lanes. So I recommend you map out your site beforehand, whether you know where you're going or whether you don't know where you're going. I would map it out beforehand. So for example, if I was going to my clinical site that I've already been to, 30 minutes before I have to leave, I like to map out where I'm going just to see if there's any wrecks, anything that may slow me down, and if I need to leave a little bit earlier. I would also recommend, if you're going to a new site, mapping that out about a week before. So again, for example, let's say I'm going to my site next week and today's Monday, but I'm going to my site next Tuesday. So on Tuesday of this week, I would be mapping out where I need to go at that time, just so I can see what the work and school traffic looks like on my way there on a weekly basis. So I can kind of see, or I can get a good estimate of how long it'll take for me to get there. If you have to get a coffee or something to eat on the way, that's fine. Just be sure to factor that into your time, because you don't want to walk in late with like a Starbucks cup. Like, you know, it just looks bad. So be sure to factor in that time for those extra things that you may need to stop and get, including gas. I've been there several times. I didn't know that I needed gas before I got in my car, and I had to try to rush to get gas and head to my site. So I would just keep those things in mind and leave a little bit earlier. Now, don't get me wrong, things happen. Sometimes you just can't help but be late. In those cases, I would message your clinical instructor, your teacher, one of the sonographers at your site, so they aren't wondering where you are. But overall, just do your best to be on time. Tip number 3 is get to know your site. Get a feel for the hospital as soon as you can. On the first day, I would ask to figure out where certain things are, like the ER, inpatient rooms, elevators, where the linen closet is, where the supply closet is, things like that you might be going to every day while you're at your site. You can also ask to follow one of the sonographers if they're going somewhere that you've never been before, just so you can see where it is, and if they want you to go there in the future, you already know where to go. Now, some of you might be at a small clinic, some of you might be at a big hospital. It'll take time to get used to where you are, but if you're ever lost, please stop and ask someone. They'd rather you ask than to be lost at the site. So asking someone is always okay, but try to get to know your site and it'll be really helpful in the future. Tip number 4 is don't say no. As a student, you're told not to say no whenever it comes to a sonographer asking if you want to do an exam, if you want to shadow an exam, and I agree with this. The only time that I would say you could say no is if there's another exam that you are wanting to shadow or scan at the same time, or if it's past time for you to leave your site. If they ask you to do something that you're not exactly sure how to do, there's ways to go about that. The way my program was set up, we were learning as we were going to clinical. So there was a lot of information that we hadn't covered yet that they were asking me to scan for, and I had no idea. So this is something that I would say. So let's say I was in my abdomen rotation in my first semester, and all we've ever worked on is abdomen, and I don't know how to do really any other exam, and they ask me to do a lower venous study to check for blood clots because the patient is having swelling and pain. So I would say something like, we haven't gone over vascular yet, so I'm not sure about the protocol, but can I shadow you and then back scan so I can maybe start one in the future sometime? Or if I knew how to do the exam and I was just a little bit iffy on what the protocol was, I would ask for them to kind of go over it with me real quick, and then I'll let them know that I'll start it. And then if I have any questions, I will be sure to let them know. There's been many times to where I've been put in a situation to where I don't know the material because it was something that we haven't learned yet, but I still found a way to learn from it, whether it was watching or scanning and getting feedback after. Some sites are very busy and maybe understaffed, and that may not allow for that much student involvement when it comes to scanning, unfortunately. So you have to take every chance that you can to scan, because you never know, if you go to another site, they may not allow you to scan that much. As a student, I always appreciated when someone would let me scan, even if it was just for 5 minutes, especially at a site that's very busy. And most of the time they do have to come back scan you afterwards. But remember, at the end of the day, any scanning that you get will make you better. Tip number 5 is write down everything. If your teacher hasn't told you already, you should be keeping a little notebook and pen with you that you can fit in your pocket to keep on you at all times. This can be used to write down any information that's given to you by your instructor, any notes that you have from studying that you want to take with you to your site, or any feedback that you get, or even the exams that you have done with your sonographer to log into Trajexis. What I would do a lot of the time is write down the protocol on my book, and the book was no bigger than the size of my hand. I'd write it down in the book. I would prop it up on the machine so that I can see the protocol while I'm doing the scan. It was really nice to be able to write something down at any moment. All of the notebooks that I still have with me to this day, and I've had to refer back to them a couple times. But it's just really nice to be able to write down anything and everything whenever you have it with you all the time. I have this problem where I think I'm gonna remember something, and I put it in my brain and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna remember this. And then I go ahead and write it down because I'm not gonna remember it. You might not remember it. You are a stressed out student with a lot on your plate. Or if you're starting this, you will eventually have a lot on your plate. So writing things down is the best way to remember them. So be sure to keep a little notebook with you so you can write down any information that you have and you can refer back to it later. Tip number 6 is to let your site know about your comps early on. Now, if you're not supposed to be getting comps at this time, don't worry about it. Maybe let them know the things that you want to work towards. But if you are in your semester where you should be getting comps, I would write them all down maybe the second or third day that you're at your site, and maybe stick it somewhere where everybody can see so they know where you are and what you're trying to accomplish while you're here. Because you don't want to be a week or two before you leave your site and you're like, okay, I want to get all these comps done. And you may be able to do them, but that's going to be a lot of pressure on you. That might put some pressure on your sonographer that you're with. Just make a sheet of paper, write down all the comps you need, make it really clear so everybody can see what it is that you need, and hopefully that'll kind of help them keep an eye out for you just in case you can start an exam that you may comp on. Tip number 7 is bring study material for downtime. Whenever I was a student, there wasn't a lot of downtime, but there was enough to where I could get some studying in. So I would ask your site first. I wouldn't bring any electronics first off. I would maybe bring a textbook and ask them if it's okay if you study. Most of the time, they're going to say yes, or they might say, we have an exam that we would like you to start. But if they do say yes to studying during your downtime, I would bring a book, some homework, something that is productive. That way, whenever you get home, you don't have as much to do and you can kind of relax a little bit after clinicals, because that's really important. If I had a book that was attached to my computer with an access code, I would bring just my computer because it's small. I can fit it in my backpack just fine. And I take notes from my computer on a little spiral notebook. I could do practice questions on there. I could do Quizlet on there. So that really helped me in studying for things like my abdomen exam. And I was really thankful that they let me take that time to study. But again, ask your sonographers before you start to study. Don't get caught up in the studying. Be sure that you're aware of what's going on, just in case there's an exam that you can watch or even start. You want to be ready to put all that aside at a moment's notice and go start the exam. I never really studied on my phone just because I didn't want them to think that I was like on social media or texting somebody, because with my school, they did not want us to be on our phones whatsoever. Some places may not care, but even if they said that we could be on our phones, I wouldn't be, because I don't want them to think that I care more about what's on the phone than what's going on here, or that I'm not studying on the phone, even if I am. Using my computer just cleared up any confusion for me and possibly somebody who could think like, oh, she's on social media on her phone, or she's always on her phone, even though you'd be studying. So I would bring either your computer or textbook and use that to study. Tip number 8 is don't be afraid to ask questions. If you have questions, please ask someone. As a recovering shy girl, I understand being so scared to ask any sort of question. I promise it is okay. So especially being a student, you want to ask those questions, whether it's something about a protocol, information about a certain subject, or even something as simple as where something is in the hospital. I also understand not having a ton of questions, and it's not because I knew everything, because that was far from the case. Far from the case. I did not know everything. It's just I don't think of a bunch of questions. Usually I will just listen and kind of look out for things that I don't know and kind of make a mental note or write it down in my notebook. And usually if I have a question, it gets answered pretty quick just by me listening. But I was so nervous about asking questions at first. And then once I got comfortable with realizing that I am a student and I'm here to learn, those questions kind of came a little bit easier. But yeah, never be afraid to ask a question. Tip number 9. Unfortunately, not every day will be a good day. The bad might outweigh the good just because you feel so nervous and you feel like sometimes you don't know anything, but that's okay. There are days that are going to be harder than others, way harder than others. Like you're going to feel like you keep messing up, or you keep asking the same questions and you're just a nervous wreck. That's how I was. My first site, I feel like I really didn't talk that much just because, again, so anxious, so scared, because they tell you that these clinical sites are like a job interview. And I completely agree with that, because they look at your work ethic, they look at how you work with other people, your knowledge of certain things, your willingness to learn, and they take all that into account for if maybe they want to hire you in the future. For one of my papers that they had for our clinical binders, it was basically like a work traits, which we give to a sonographer, and they would basically rank us on certain things like our behavior, our appearance, how on time we were, you know, stuff like that. And a lot of people would make a copy of it and keep it just in case in the future you were to come back and apply, and they would take a look at that sheet and see how you were as a student. So it's really important to put your best foot forward, but not every day is going to be a good day. There will be days where you come home and you just crash out. Like, you are done, you've had it, but it's so important that you keep going. You're not going to know everything. You're not going to know everything once you're done being a student. This is something to where you continuously learn throughout your career. That brings me to my 10th and final tip, which is all you can do is your very best. I said it before and I'll say it again. You're a student. Yes, you are still learning, but you also need to remember to apply everything that the sonographers are telling you. Remember what they're saying. Like I said, write it down. Writing it down is going to be the best way to retain that information, because you don't want to be told something and then the next time you don't do it. So putting your best foot forward is going to be remembering those things and applying them the next time, stuff like that. You won't know everything, and that's okay. The most important thing is putting your best foot forward. If there's another student there who's either been there for longer than you or is just starting there, make friends with them. You know, y'all can relate to a lot more than you think. See what they're doing and y'all could help each other in the future. You may even see each other in the field, because the world of ultrasound is so small. So, you know, make friends with the people that you're there with. It really all comes down to your journey in sonography as a work in progress. And really, if you put your all into it, showing up on time, scanning everything you can, being prepared every day, you won't have a problem, I promise. You have to keep an open mind as to your learning abilities, as well as the sonographer who is trying to juggle a student and their job at the same time. But you'll get into the swing of things quicker than you think. And even when you do get into the swing of things, there will still be slip-ups, and that's okay. What matters is how you learn from them and how you fix those mistakes. So that is it for my 10 tips for sonography students starting clinical. Thank you so much for clicking on this video and taking the time to watch. I really appreciate it. If there's anything else that y'all want to see, let me know down in the comments and I will gladly make the video. And be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. See ya.